subscribe, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we've got here 4 different experiences. I try to run on time. We have 5 minutes for questioning. May I just, before giving the audience the possibility of asking questions, I think that these 4 or 5 issues, as again in the first part that were raised here, are very interesting. This idea of climate of opportunities is very interesting. But it's not only climate of opportunities, it's profiting of the opportunities, as most of you in fact said. The experience of Lausanne is really very interesting because it's really moving both ways, and I think that I was very impressive, but I won't disturb you. At coffee time I'll probably ask some questions. And finally is this type of credit transfer that was said at the end. Maybe there's a challenge here for Arab universities, for European universities to try and get not only the standard Bologna credits, but this type of employability, and shall I say, not just give them a job, is train them to create their own jobs. And I think this is also the best way to give them some tools to fish and not give them the fish, okay? So, questions, please, as a gentleman over there. I think that we've run out of microphones, but could you please speak loud, identify yourself? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is İbrahim Özdemir. I'm from İpek University, Ankara, Turkey. I want to ask a question to Franco Ricciotti. Thank you very much for your presentation, and also implying at the end of your speech, as Royal Highness Princess Sumaya said in the morning, it is time for the East and the West, wisdom of the East, and to meet the Western science and also philosophy, and to learn from each other. And with regard to university and technology, and also technological problems, environmental problems, you are doing great projects, there is no doubt. But what about when we look at the knowledge-based report of the region? The region has a lot of problems, social problems, from illiteracy to conflict and poverty, to, as you also mentioned, about the situation of refugees. What is the role of a modern university, 21st century university, must be in this context to respond to these regional problems? Do you have any projects on this, or as much as I understand, you are attracting a lot of smarter students to work on your projects, just in the spirit of the mobilization of higher education. Thank you very much.
Well, I think, no single institution detains the global solution, clearly. So I think it's not for me to answer this question, but I wish to say this. We do attract the best students in the world. They come to me from MIT, from Johns Hopkins, from Tsinghua, from IITs, from Polytechnique Paris. They come to me from EPFL, from ETH. So we really get excellent students. There's no question about that. The interesting thing is they want to come to the region because they want to contribute. I read in that very desire the seeds of the solution that you're asking for.
Okay. Any more questions? No, I think that you are really driven for coffee. Well, thank you very much. I'll ask you to greet the panelists. Thank you very
much. I'm very pleased, representing the Council of Magna Carta Observatory, to be given the opportunity for this session at this conference. And I'm joined by several colleagues, members of our council, Dr. Robert Quinn, Professor Carla Salvatera, and Dr. Mohammed Lutfi, who are also participants in this conference and also members of the collegium of our observatory. What we would like to do is first give a presentation of what Magna Carta is about and illustrate that at two cases. And then I will be complemented by my two colleagues. And then I would like to invite you how you would respond to these issues. And these issues are issues of values. The statement in the title of my first slide, "No safe change without values," refers to the fact that in the present world, universities are constantly changing. They are constantly responding. They are constantly reacting to things that change in the world around. And to steer a clear and good and responsible course, you need values. And that's what Magna Carta is all about. It is a non-profit organization that is based on the Magna Carta Declaration of 26 years ago. The observatory is founded by the University of Bologna and supported by the University of Bologna and the European University Association. It started as a European project, but right from the beginning it hoped to become a worldwide movement and a worldwide project. And we are constantly inviting universities to join our community. There are about 800 universities worldwide signatories of the Magna Carta. And each and every university in the world is free to apply. And I would like to invite them and invite you to do so. From the Arab world, we have, apart from a handful of universities from Morocco and a handful of universities from Egypt, and one or two from Tunisia and Lebanon, at the moment only rather few members. And we would really welcome a broader membership. And when you are applying, we ask for the ways you are dealing with institutional norms and values. We ask you to describe the way you deal with institutional norms and values, the policy you have, and the situation of academic and institutional autonomy you're working with. We ask you, when underwriting the Magna Carta, to subscribe to a couple of basic principles that we think underlie the workings of each and every university. And this is the first one. This is the classic formulation of 26 years ago. The university is an autonomous institution at the heart of societies, differently organized because of geography and historical heritage, not the same everywhere. It produces, examines, appraises and hands down culture by research and teaching. To meet the needs of the world around it, its research and teaching must be morally and intellectually independent of all political authority and economic power. And in this first principle, there are a couple of very important elements to our work. One of this, of course, is the moral and intellectual independence. But the other one is that we are very much aware of not just the fate, but the need of geographic and historical differentiation. No one model solution can serve the whole world. And that's why we, from the Magna Carta Observatory, want to combine and recombine our work with friends supporting universities in all parts of the world. Because the same answers need to be reinvented and reapplied in different settings over and over again. So please come and join the movement. It's our ambition to be active and relevant worldwide, and to avoid misunderstanding, not as a hierarchy or a court of law judging universities, but rather as a community willing to dedicate our common shared knowledge and creativity to finding paths and ways ahead of being morally and intellectually independent, universities with integrity. I will present 2 cases to illustrate what it is about. One is about academic independence and integrity in terms of institutional context, statutes, strategies, and leadership, and one in terms of education and academic skills. Academic independence and integrity is a foundational quality of a university. It's not an elitist privilege and an excuse to not listen to anybody else. Not an excuse for ivory towers, not an excuse for authoritarian leadership styles. No, it is meant to enable independent teaching and learning and research, to serve society. And to have that kind of equality, it is of course important that it's not something that is self-promotion of a university alone, but this independence, this quality of autonomy must be granted to us. It must be granted to us by societies, by governments, by political, religious and ethnic groups, by businesses, by private owners. Not because they like us, not because they think that we are nice people deserving that kind of an autonomy, but because they realize that only an independent institution can do exactly what a university should do and should be. But there's another side to it. It's not enough that a university is granted autonomy and independence from outside. It is also very, very important that universities use and develop and maintain this independence and autonomy inside. It must be practiced and protected. It should not be just the autonomy of the university president, or just the autonomy of the dean, or just the independence of each professor. It should be true of everyone and at each level in the university. And it also takes with itself responsibilities. Freedom, academic freedom, is not an excuse for everything goes. One of our colleagues, Professor Osram Badrawi from Egypt, said at a conference of Magna Carta some 7 years ago in Bologna, academic freedom is the foundation of a university. And faculties should have that kind of freedom, should enjoy it. That kind of freedom should be protected. But teaching staff, as well as administrators, he said, are expected to prize accuracy, to exercise appropriate self-control, to show respect for the opinions of others, and thus ensure the academic freedom of students and the rights of access to the university. It's very easy to misuse and misinterpret academic freedom as a sort of independent freedom to do whatever goes. A university should use that freedom within its mission and its task and responsibility as a university. It is an institution of higher learning. It is not a business. It is not a political party. It is not a religious group, nor a mosque. And this implies that university people should carefully use their freedom and do this in a responsible way, to the positive and to the negative. Go for fair analysis and avoid conflicts of interest and personal gain. And that cannot be maintained only on a personal basis, by preaching to the heart and brains of individuals at the university. It should be a strategy and a responsibility for the university as a whole. There is another side to integrity and academic independence. It is also very important to the work of teaching and learning. Not just because admission officers and teachers should treat students fairly, examine them on the basis of their performance, and not because they bribe them. Select students because they are admittable to a university, but on their merits. But also because of the educational value of these qualities themselves. And that's my second case. In many societies, and the representative of ESU referred to it already this afternoon, there are signs that societies are often asking too reductionist qualities of students. Students that have to be fitting into the vacancies in the business too precisely, just doing the kind of work that needs to be done. A kind of misrepresentation of academic skills. In fact, we should be asking whether, if we speak about skills and competencies of our graduates in such a reductionist way, we are not really betraying the role of universities. Because what is going on in university is requiring much more. What we see in our society today, growing complexities, a trust crisis, a quest for integrity, grand challenges requiring new ways of broad thinking, a culture blending, increasing competition, the need of understanding different cultures and groups, etc., etc. Quite a few challenges, and this we cannot handle by just practical skills and competencies. What we need is broader academic skills that are closely linked to academic freedom and integrity. That's not just important for graduates that become leaders. It's important in all sorts of businesses and in all sorts of professions. And the academic version of 21st century skills are academic skills in terms of intellectual independence, drive to inquire, of scientific integrity, professional ethics, and civic qualities in terms of public interest and world citizenship. And in this way, you see that our values of academic independence and integrity also translate into the skills and competencies of our students and the ideals of our universities in the classroom. So to sum up, our Magna Carta Universitatum was signed by hundreds of European universities, and many more have done so since. And we would like that movement to grow and go further and further, convinced of the value of these values. It's more than a conviction, it's more than something that you simply underwrite, it's something that you need to work on, and it's something that you need to discuss. And as I said before, it is very, very important to translate these ideals into regional situations in different ways. In Northern Africa, other than the southern part of Latin America. In Europe, in another way than in the Middle East. In China, in another way than in Canada. And we need that regional work to be done by colleagues, by universities joining our movement. We would like to invite you to join this worldwide critical self-analysis, developing strategic values. It is a case that is just as important as all the other important cases that we have on our university agendas. This September in Uppsala in Sweden, we have our next conference, and I would like you to join that meeting. We are talking there on university independence and university integrity in different settings, a workshop from the point of view of students, one from the point of view of integrity, maintenance and management within the university, one to the point of view of ethical codes of ethical behavior in university, and the more general questions of what it takes to be a modern university, trustworthy, with integrity in modern society. Outside you have the banners that also point to this conference. I hope you take the chance of coming, you take the chance of participating in our discussions in September in Uppsala in Sweden, where we have our annual conference. And finally, I hope that many of you will decide to become a signatory of this Magna Carta Universitatum and be part of the worldwide movement, and particularly contribute to the Middle East, North African version of our applications. Thank you very much for your interest. Colleague.
Thank you, Saibal. Thank you all. As I said in my opening remarks this morning, I think that the public statement of a university signing the Magna Carta in and of itself is very important, because it simply says that we as an institution share these values with our fellow institutions around the world. I think I gave a long list this morning of concrete things that I was hoping universities can do, and I know we in Magna Carta and we at Scholars at Risk are constantly wrestling with how do we implement or operationalize the values that we already, so many of us share, but it's difficult to put them into place. And so I think starting with the Magna Carta, signing it, is the starting point, not of any solution that ends the process, but begins the process, begins a conversation. And so I alluded this morning to the fact that in my organization, Scholars at Risk, we've done workshops all around the world. We bring people from different countries to talk about academic freedom, mostly at the individual level. And we learned something very early on in organizing these workshops. Well, we learned two things, actually. One is that in the workshops, we do these workshops with translation and headsets because we have people from so many different countries. And we found that was wonderful because everyone had to wait for the translation. And we had a chance to listen to each other. And one of the things we discovered when we listened to each other is we always had a 2 or 3 day workshop, and the first day was always the same. We asked people to say, what are the challenges in your country for the university space, for the values of the university, for academic freedom? And it always started out the same way in the morning. The first person would take the microphone, as I have it, and would say, it's different in my country. You don't understand. And then they would describe the ways that universities and professors and students can feel pressure on values questions. And then they would hand the microphone to someone from the next country. And they would say, well, it's different in my country. But then they would describe the same kinds of pressures. And by the end of the day, listening to people from 20 different countries and hearing the same kinds of pressures happening in different cultural settings or different factual settings, yes, but the same types of pressures, we began to create and see a space to have a conversation. And so while I fully agree with Saibal that the regional differences are very important for figuring out the process to move forward from that understanding, I think the starting point is a similar factual dynamic, because at the end of the day, the space of the university is the space where ideas and power interact. And there's always going to be tension in that space. Briefly, let me share 2 cases, because I tend to look at these issues from the case of individual people. One was a scholar who was a professor of public health. And this is just one example of how a scholar can get in trouble in times when you wouldn't really expect someone to get in trouble. But this scholar was a professor of public health and did research on infant mortality. So why would this get someone in trouble? Well, this scholar's data showed that infant mortality was much higher than the official figures were saying, which was an embarrassment. But this scholar was an honest scholar, so he published his honest data, and this got him in trouble with his department chair. He published his next results, which was the same, and this got him in trouble with his university president. And eventually this got him in trouble enough with his government that this scholar ended up in prison. Our organization tried to campaign not because we're political, but because this was about the values of the university. This was about being able to share honest data. We jump ahead 10 years in the unimaginable. This scholar is out of prison. This scholar is now the president of Tunisia. So these values issues and being willing to stand up for these values make a difference. The second example is a scholar from Ethiopia who came and wasn't able to work in Ethiopia at the time and came to the United States. And I happened to be nearby in the United States where he was, so we went to have lunch together. And I said, how are things going? He was a physicist. So, how are things going? He says, well, I got in trouble with my department chair. And I said, I can't believe that. He's an excellent scholar and a wonderful, kind man. I couldn't imagine in any way that he could get in trouble with his department chair. And I said, how on earth did you get in trouble with your department chair? He said, well, I gave my exams last week. And I said, yes. And he said, well, apparently American students expect to score better on their exams than they deserve. But they didn't get high enough grades. And of course, we had a conversation and we laughed. This was a bit of a joke. He didn't get in serious pressure. But this was also one of the examples in a less pressured way, but where there are tensions between students and faculty, between administrators and faculty, between outside of the university and inside the university. And I just think that the structure that we need to talk about these situations is really important as we move forward in a process. There is no right or wrong necessarily, but it's how we talk about these things and learn from each other. So I'm really honored to be part of Magna Carta. I hope to see many of you at the meeting in Uppsala or one of the subsequent meetings. And really, I have learned so much from the participants. I would hope to learn from you at these events.
Shall we take questions or shall I go on?
Whatever you want.
Well, just a short addition. Talking from the point of view of one university, looking at Magna Carta as a kind of tool to develop our own university. Of course, we are a very special case, having been the first to have benefit from other university granting the Magna Carta to our university in the celebration of the 900 years. But the challenge is how to make these values be a guiding principle within the university. And I want to make two examples which are quite recent. The most recent one is the writing of our Code of Ethics. Italian universities are asked by law to have their own Code of Ethics, and there are recent norms for the public conduct of civil servants, which are very, very prescriptive because of cases of corruption. There have been, the Parliament has taken some norms and some legislation which is really, really very much prescriptive. So within our university we started a discussion on what should the Code of Ethics be for. Should be something to be compliant to an external pressure, or should it be something that we are going to develop because we want to have a development in the awareness about values and also in the respect of the autonomy of the different departments and individual faculty. So that was the starting of the discussion, and the Magna Carta has been, I would say, a point of reference, not just for the text itself and for the values that the Magna Carta gives, but also for the work that it had developed with guidelines for a Code of Ethics, which were a kind of external, internal point of reference. An external point of reference which was not given by an external power, but which was given by a community of other universities. So it was a kind of relief to be able to, not to be self-referential, but at the same time not to be only compliant to external pressure. So this was a very important point in which the debate in our university went exactly about values and about the Magna Carta. And another short example was 2 years ago when we
Thank you very much. My name is Ibrahim Özdemir. I am founding rector of a private university. When I started as a founding rector, I have similar ideals of Magna Carta, coming from the Middle East concept of university as the home for knowledge, to the research universities, then to the universities sensitive to the market. But to my surprise, the owners of university, they want to attract more students. They interested in some certain subjects, not as the ideals of a university. The question, I think, is that we are witnessing now, as the UNESCO and OECD and also Magna Carta is saying, without investing in higher education, you cannot solve your country's problems. So, there is a big interest in the higher education overall, but this also leads to the measurement of the private universities. I just visited some countries in the South Asia. I found some universities, private universities, you can't call them as a university. They are just interested in just a home, turn to a university. So the problem is that how with this privatization of higher education, and with the, on the other side, there are funds from European, EU funds, also some national funds, but they especially give them to special projects. Especially when you have a project on defense industry, on defense in any country, you can find any funding. There is no problem regarding funds. But when you come to, to some about some languages, about some, cultural problems, about understanding society, about philosophy, humanities, we have problems. When we are talking about to open a humanity program in our university, in any private university, the owner of university will ask, it will attract students. It have any connection to the market demand from a university. So I think how we can, with the Magna Carta's ideals, we can, respond to the private universities. I think it is not the problem, is not the public universities. Or major problems when to bring to the Magna Carta is the private universities. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your contribution. This is I think, a very clear illustration of the kind of tensions a university can get into, be it a private one with a easily identifiable owner, or a public one with a political system as an owner, experiencing similar pressures. I mean, the stories may differ in some respects, but the tendency of the story is often very much the same. And that's exactly the kind of cases that we want to discuss, that we want to speak about, because only when we join forces and we don't take each case as an individual experience, but see the group phenomenon and see other universities in other countries in different political systems experiencing the same, we can try to build up countervailing powers and do something about it. So thank you very much. Who else might want to speak on this? Yes?
Yes, thank you. Professor Mikati from Lebanon. I would like to focus on the statement you mentioned about Magna Carta of Bologna. You said that university is an institution. University is not a mosque. You know that the first university all over the world was born as a mosque in Egypt 1 century before the birth of Bologna. Mosque doesn't mean religion, but the contemplation and reading the world, discover the planet, respect the humanity of human being. Teaching astronomy, mathematics, physics, mosque is the place to link the creature to the creator. As Mr. Issam Sharaf mentioned this today, it's useful to respect also the diversities of people, the items. Every word of mosque has a big meaning, like meditation, or opening-minded, strength, quality, unity, equality, etc. So we hope that you correct what you have mentioned. Thank you.
It's somewhat difficult. Oops. It's somewhat difficult to correct for me because I was quoting Professor Osram from Cairo when I made that quotation. So this is what he said at the Bologna meeting in 2007. These were his words. And he used them, if I understood well, as an explanation that a university should always remain as a university within its mission. It should not take on the role of a political party, or the role of a government, or of a business, or of an ethnic group, or of a religion. It should have a teaching and research role and mission, and it should develop its standards and ethical norms on the basis of that mission. That was what he meant. And he knew, just like you, of course, the ancient history of Islam education, and he no trouble about recognizing the basic values of that history. But that was what he meant. And I quoted him because I think there is a truth in that a university, of course, has a role in government, in society, but it has a role in society different from all the other institutions in society. And we must, in our discussions about the value of university, be very clear about that specific role. That's another thing he said in the same speech, if we look at places where universities are in decline, it is where the universities become parts of political parties, become parts of businesses, become parts of government systems. And then a university is an open place for tolerant discussion and education and research is gone. And probably you would agree with that kind of idealism that he had and that he voiced so beautifully. If not, let's speak about it.
No, there's this confusion about this. We'll talk.
Yeah, we talk, exactly. Who else? Who else would like to contribute to this discussion or ask questions about, yes, the Magna Carta?
Well, thank you for this nice talk and stimulating discussion. My question, what about the research ethics as a real mission of the university in this context? Thank you.
Well, let me ask you, what do you think? Is research ethics also part of this?
I need some emphasis there. I do believe in that, but it is not emphasized in this charter.
Well, my example was today about institutional integrity and about teaching and the role of integrity and freedom. But it might as well have been an example of research integrity, because there it is even more important that people in the outside world, in society, people that use your results can trust your research. And research fraud, either by fabricating data or by leaving data out or leaving part of the discussion out is very dangerous for the reputation of a university. And in a way, if this happens at one university, it is jeopardizing the reputation of all other universities. We see in countries where these things happen, and it happens all the time, whatever we do, it is really something that you have to fight against, that you see that other universities are suffering from the malpractice of their colleagues. This is one of the reasons why we need to join forces and work together to make clear, also to our colleagues, that honesty and integrity in research is absolutely essential. You agree?
Thank you. Okay.
Who else? Yes?
Hello, everybody. Again, this afternoon. It's just kind of thinking aloud. It's a bit interesting to reflect on the fact that Socrates, for example, was executed because of immorality. Although he was completely moral in what he was doing, and the conviction was because he was, I think, corrupting the minds of the youths. Now, if we objectively look at these types of stories, don't you think that standards, even if we're talking about social, moral, academic, what have you, might not only differ between different locales, but they might differ between different generations, different mindsets, different target looking. You know what I mean? It's kind of a dynamic type of thinking in terms of how humanity is progressing, and it differs within the perspective. If we're looking at the exact same story, people then looked at it as if it was immoral. Now we say, oh God, it was immorality par excellence. Just wanted to throw that, my 2 cents.
Well, thank you very much for that contribution. I think this is very true. There is I mean, this is not, let me say this to begin with, this is not a simple topic. Whenever you talk about values, you talk about different sets of values and different types of tensions and conflicts and development. And to put it in a simple way that it is black and white, good and bad, that would be a simplification that is, of course, not corresponding to realities, and that is not corresponding to the questions we are dealing with in the university. But that, on the other hand, this is exactly why we need a university as a place for open debate and open discussion. Because what happened in Athens and what went wrong in Athens at the time of Socrates was that he was convicted. And that he got a death penalty for introducing new gods to Athens and spoiling the youth. That there was no space for having an open discussion with arguments. And if we may believe Plato, his pupil who wrote it down, he gave lots of arguments for his opinion. So I would say in a university of today, the story is very important because it shows us the danger when you have to narrow an opinion of what is an acceptable opinion. But, I mean, the kind of example you give is a beautiful example of what is at stake in a university as a place for open inquiry. Thank you very much. Yes?
I would like, Simon, to enlarge a little bit, a tiny bit, on the concept of integrity, university integrity, research integrity, our colleague mentioned. And you pointed, and rightly so, to the damage that not respecting research integrity could do to the other universities. And I would like to take it a little bit further. I'd like to mention the damage that it could cause to mankind, to humanity. A very simple example. You have a series of studies in a pandemic, you have a model, and you take out of your data 1 point. Others came, use your result, and as a consequence, they produce something that might be harmful to man. So I would just like to comment this.
Yes, thank you very much, Elena. Very true. Yes. The gentleman in front.
In the Middle East, we know that there is a large number of universities. The youth is generally well educated, massively underemployed, and the potential is essentially lost for a large number of them. Part of the problem comes from the lack of innovation that comes out of the institutions. And the reason why there's not so much innovation is because governments tend to not put enough resources into their universities to enable the research that gives rise to the innovation. So I'd like to ask you, because you spoke about values, you spoke about academic freedom, I'd like to think about this in terms of academic opportunity also. But how can the values of Magna Carta empower faculty and universities that are looking at your organization to convince their governments to invest more generously into the instruments that produce innovation? Because ultimately, university cannot disconnect itself from society. And although we are not looking at a commercial proposition, ultimately, if we produce 100 graduates, and out of these 100 graduates, 99 don't find jobs, we're not doing our job as an academia or as a. So I'd like to hear how about the values and how can these values can enable local players to speak with their governments.
Yes, I see what you mean. I think there are basically two methods we try to cope with these questions. One is offering best practices. So telling stories of what colleagues have done in other situations and what the results were. So if you have a society where universities are contributing to unemployment and where economic development is not taking place, there is a mismatch between that university's work and the needs of society. It's very hard to have a direct argument in such a situation. But what is often very helpful is showing the example of similar situations, offering best practices. That's one of the reasons why organizations like the Arab League of Universities and the European University Associations, just like our organization, are such important tools. You meet colleagues from very different settings, and they share their experience, and their experience is often more convincing than rational argument. But the second thing remains that it is very, very hard from the outside to change the mechanics of individual societies. So in some cases, for a length of time, I mean, I studied myself recently the changing fate of universities in the country of Afghanistan after the Second World War. And that's a huge tragedy. You have many differences, many changes into this direction, into that direction, and a fall back again and again and again and again. And and all sorts of outside interventions didn't solve the problem. So if you read that kind of history, you also realize there's only so little you can do from the outside. So one, at the end of the day, has to rely on the actors into present-day society. And again, there may be the example of colleagues can be of help. We try to avoid in Magna Carta the pretension that we have a sort of secret solution to all problems. We want to have the opportunity and create the opportunity of discussing values and cases where values are very important among colleagues to learn and to join forces. Not because we think we have a secret solution that will bring peace and prosperity to everywhere in the world. But this is not what you meant.
Thank you, this is great.
Yes, sure.
Just to add briefly on that, and I think all three of the last comments, your question, while I fully understand it and accept the question, also highlights one of the risks I was talking about this morning, which is there is a risk of narrowing the understanding of higher education down to a single data point of employment. And I think that's a terrible mistake. I'm not saying you're doing that, but I'm saying it's a risk. And that risk comes when we don't look at the full range of the values and have this broad discussion. I think one of the great values of being part of the Magna Carta movement is it's a regular opportunity to have this conversation. And I think the value, in addition to autonomy and academic freedom that we talk about probably most of the time, one of the other values that underlines all of the last 3 points on integrity and on what are we doing if our young people aren't moving forward, and what about how we judge various circumstances, is social responsibility. What is the responsibility of the university to exercise its functions? So I would look at the employment question in that way. Not that we're not doing our jobs, but we're not doing enough. What more can we do? And that's how we get to the integrity point, because it's a violation of that social responsibility. And even then, that's how would we look at Socrates through that lens for any one of the contemporary questions. And we could have many contemporary examples of Socrates. It's happening today, and each case needs to be looked at through the range of all the values.
Yes, please.
My question, how far we are from being independent, not accommodating ourselves to power, and are we still independent thinkers in our society, and we can affect what is going on around us, like when we're talking about the juridic system. You know, if they're not independent, then they're corrupted. And how far we are independent of our thoughts in our society. Because I believe that in many of the projects that we do, we are connected to some kind of agenda that we have to follow. But we should be worried about other things that are related to what is going on in our society. So this is my thought. I don't know if you have any reflection on that. How far we are from being independent, for respecting our dignity of teaching, you know, being honest to truth.
What would be your answer?
What would be my answer?
Yes.
I just want to hear from you. Well, it's completely different from the Arab word than the European context. I understand that. I've been in both. But I'm just trying to launch this question because I know it's a big issue here. Are we independent, you know, because with our thoughts toward critical issues in our societies? Or are we accommodating ourselves as university professors and people who are really responsible in our sectors?
Well, let me say this. There's a 19th century German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, who at one point said, it sometimes is easier to find the truth when things are dangerous and difficult than when things are easy. And I sometimes have the feeling that in a situation where university seems to have an easy life, it is more difficult to find the real value than in a situation where the situation is tense, not easy, and difficult. It sometimes seems that in a difficult situation, it's clearer where you really can contribute. Sometimes you're unable to, but you know what you should be doing, while in a situation of easy life for university, you often do whatever people think you should be doing, without paying lots of attention to the moral value or the societal value behind it. But listening to myself, this is the kind of talk that belongs to the evening. It is maybe a good topic for discussing while we are riding around Old Amman, or while we are sitting at dinner tonight. I would like to invite you to give it some thought and to discuss these matters of integrity, honesty, and independence, these value-oriented matters that we strongly believe are essential to the future of universities. And once more, I really would like to invite Arab universities, who are only a small group so far in Magna Carta, to reconsider whether they wouldn't join, and like to repeat my invitation. Come to our meeting on September 18-19 in Uppsala, Sweden, where we discuss these issues and where you will have ample opportunity of discussing it with your colleagues as well. Thank you very much. It's been a good discussion.